The concept of a new world order has been a topic of discussion for decades, with many believing it to be a secretive group of powerful individuals seeking to control and manipulate global events. In recent years, the topic of climate change has become a forefront issue, with many world leaders and organizations pushing for drastic measures to combat its effects. However, some argue that the emphasis on climate change is being used as a tool for oppression, perpetuated by a supposed Satanic New World Order. Proponents of this theory argue that the push for climate change legislation and awareness is not solely driven by a desire to protect the environment, but rather to implement a set of policies and regulations that will ultimately lead to a loss of individual freedoms and a transfer of power to a select few. They claim that by creating a sense of urgency and panic around the issue of climate change, governments and other powerful entities can justify the implementation of draconian measures such as strict regulations on energy consumption, travel, and even personal freedoms. One of the primary ways in which this is being achieved, according to proponents of this theory, is through the use of propaganda and manipulation of the media. By presenting a distorted view of the facts and using emotional appeals to sway public opinion, those pushing the climate change agenda are able to create a sense of consensus and urgency that does not necessarily reflect the true state of affairs. This can be seen in the way that climate change is often presented as an existential threat, with predictions of catastrophic consequences if immediate action is not taken. Furthermore, critics argue that the solutions being proposed to combat climate change, such as a transition to renewable energy sources and a reduction in carbon emissions, are not only unrealistic but also serve to further consolidate power in the hands of a select few. For example, the push for a global carbon credit system, which would allow countries and corporations to buy and sell credits based on their carbon emissions, has been criticized as a way to create a new form of currency that can be controlled and manipulated by a small group of powerful entities. In addition, the emphasis on climate change has also been used to justify increased surveillance and control over individuals under the guise of monitoring and regulating energy consumption and emissions. This can be seen in the development of smart cities and the implementation of smart meters, which allow governments and corporations to collect detailed data on energy usage and other personal habits. Critics argue that this is a clear example of how the climate change agenda is being used to erode individual freedoms and create a more totalitarian society. Moreover, some argue that the Satanic New World Order is using climate change as a means to promote a Malthusian agenda, which seeks to reduce the global population and create a more controlled and managed society. This can be seen in the push for population control measures such as birth control and sterilization, which are often presented as necessary to reduce the strain on the environment. However, critics argue that these measures are not only morally reprehensible, but also serve to further the interests of a select few who seek to reduce the global population to a more manageable level. In conclusion, while the issue of climate change is undoubtedly a serious one, the emphasis on it has been used as a tool for oppression and control by a supposed Satanic New World Order. By perpetuating a sense of urgency and panic, manipulating public opinion through propaganda, and justifying draconian measures and increased surveillance, those pushing the climate change agenda are able to further consolidate power and create a more totalitarian society. As such, it is essential to approach the issue of climate change with a critical and nuanced perspective, recognizing both the legitimate consent and the potential for manipulation and control.